So welcome everyone to the latest Q community update. A lot to get through today, so we'll quickly flash through things as quickly as we can here. The agenda as presented here, a couple of key things to actually talk about. So I won't read through the agenda, we can just get straight into it. Just a quick refresher on the roadmap itself. Specifically, what it is at a high level we're trying to do with Q, the open source project here. And that's principally getting Q to V1, which is a sort of a stable representation of the language, with correctness and performance being key parts of that. We talked as well about that being supported by Command Q, the Go API, and all related tooling, which includes things like the OSP. The central registry, which we've talked a lot about, and modules generally. Central registry is a key enabler of that Q ecosystem, and we'll talk a bit more about that in today's session as well. But the goal being that Q should be a true interlingua for a variety of different encodings, whether data or schema. Documentation being a key part of getting people along that journey of adopting Q and incorporating it into their system, and really with a view to supporting everyone who's building with or around Q, whether that be open source projects, companies, products, whatever it might be. So that should really be throughout everything that we're doing. Guiding principles being that wherever we are making, for example, language changes, that we try to provide automated fixes to bring everybody along with us, that we have a backwards compatibility first concept and guiding principle to what it is we're doing, and be guided by real world situations and problems when we're thinking about what to actually do with Q itself, whether the language or the tooling as well. And test. And that's been a huge driver to us actually being able to make some significant changes with eval v3, which we'll talk about shortly. So where does eval v3 fit into it? The evaluator, just as a quick refresher, is at the core of everything that is Q. And so everything that we build on top of on a daily basis relies on the evaluator. And it's a true sort of onion approach to things. And the evaluator is at the core of it. So getting that right is a critical piece of anything that builds on top of it, especially the wider Q ecosystem. So that's why in the run-up to KubeCon, there was a lot of work that happened in the evaluator space. Marcel will talk a bit more about that and where we're actually at with that work as well. But first, Daniel's going to talk to us about releases. Thanks, Daniel.
Yep. So we haven't, the last time we spoke was about 6-7 weeks ago. So since then, we did do one backport release. The main point of that was to rebuild it with Go 1.24, so Q-get-Go works again, because that's how Go works, at least in terms of loading Go code. And we also backported a fix to embedding files such that if you specify the binary encoding, it no longer assumes that the file is going to be valid UTF-8, which didn't make any sense. We've also done 3 releases for 0.13. The biggest change that you might notice is that eval v3 is now on by default, and Marcel will talk about that more in a bit. Also, of course, many improvements and bug fixes in eval v3. There's also a new Q-trim algorithm that was done by Matthew, and he spoke about that at the previous community call update. So it was done in master at that point, but now it's been released. And there's also a bunch of new commands, which Roger mentioned at the last call, such as mod mirror and factor imports. But we'll also briefly talk about using commands such as vet with remote packages as well directly. And as a reminder, please test either master or the latest alpha, especially if you're having performance issues with eval v2, or if you tried eval v3 before and it didn't work for you. Because at this point, we want to move towards a final release pretty much as soon as we're able to. So if any of you might run into bugs, please let us know as soon as possible so that we can react to them soon. And in a similar vein, if you are not already in the latest stable release, and there's a good reason why, please let me know. Be it because of performance or because of regressions or anything else, we want to be aware of people stuck on old releases, because ideally that should never happen.
Hey, Marcel, you're on mute.
Thank you for reminding me. Yes, I hope everybody can hear me now. Yeah, so as I already mentioned in last community call, so we did some performance analysis last time, and we saw that even though probably some algorithmic improvements, so big O improvements will still, of course, benefit a lot of configurations. We saw there were a few where there really was no gain to be made except just purely memory management, right? So pure evaluator performance. And one of the big performance hits actually was the closeness algorithm. So that didn't really change from eval v2. Eval v2 had memory management, but eval v3 had but eval v2 did not do memory management for closeness, but eval v3 did neither, right? So then basically there was some feedback from the community where people didn't like the way closeness worked in the first place. So that actually gave us an idea to significantly improve performance on closeness. So I'll get back to that later. So in general, the goal for eval v3 is still the same. So we want to improve performance, we want to improve simplicity. So this is also where the closeness comes in, and maintainability. And thanks everybody for filing bugs. I thought I removed that FAQ, but anyway. Yeah, so we flipped the default from for eval v3. So in implementing the new closeness algorithm, so most of the outstanding bugs were related to closeness, so that those were immediately all fixed, almost per definition. Of course, we did introduce some new bugs with the new algorithm, but new algorithm is considerably easier, much easier to fix. So the turnaround time for fixing bugs to Daniel's dismay was about 5 minutes instead of 1 day, basically. So like this was a big change. So with respect to the number of core, so P0, P1 issues, I think it's about the same. Maybe there was one edit, I don't know, but it's still in the same order of magnitude. Because we flipped to eval v3, that exposed actually a lot more bugs. So we fixed like 28 GitHub issues since last time. So last time, I think there were like, I don't remember how much were open, like 12 or so. So now there's 6 open. So 2 of them are Unity related. Some of them are related to the new closeness. So last time we had 12 out of 20 Unity projects passing. Passing means it passes and it improved performance. So now it's 16 out of 20. And of the 4 remaining, 2 have probably the same bug in closeness. We know what it is, just need to fix it. And 2 of them actually have a slowdown compared to eval v3, which we also have a good idea what is causing that. So, and again, the important changes since last time are the new closeness algorithm. So the thing that inspired it is that people were complaining that a reference in an embedding position behaves different with respect to closeness as a reference in, like in other positions. So we do have an idea to actually simplify this quite a bit, which coincidentally will also simplify closeness a lot and will actually give extra features to the language. It's actually a simplification overall. So this inspired the new closeness algorithm, but it's actually quite a big change from eval v2 or eval v3. I mean, it's not a super big change, but it's significant enough that it would be causing quite a bit of incompatibilities. So the basic principle is that we see closeness more as a typo checking than really something that's part of the lattice. So we would not have closeness as part of the lattice anymore. Doesn't really matter too much, but it's a subtle change, but it makes a lot of things a lot easier. What we realized though is that with this new algorithm, we can retrofit it to be more like eval v2. So it actually, eval v3 was much more interpreting closeness as part of the lattice, so much stricter about things. So we've abandoned that proposition. So what we consider to be bug fixes first are now gone. So as a result of it, it's actually much closer to eval v2, strangely enough. So it should make it easier to move from eval v2 to now to eval v3. So a lot of the difference are actually gone. But the idea is that we will eventually move to the simpler model. But I'll write a proposal in the upcoming time to explain what exactly that does. But right now we actually managed to, except for some really esoteric cases, to be quite compatible with eval v2. So there's still some performance tuning needed. Daniel's actually did some big performance improvements in a pretty fast pace in the last few days. So I don't know how much of this performance tuning is still needed, but I bet it still is, and there are some things we can do. Again, if we simplify it, a lot of that will go away, but we want to have the improved performance even with the eval v2 semantics. Then there's one outstanding bug that we know of, which causes trouble for 2 people. Also, so one big benefit of the new closeness algorithm, so with the old closeness, because definitions could mean different thing in different closeness contexts, we still had to unify in all definitions in many cases. So with the new algorithm, that's no longer the case. So if we unify the definition once, we can drop any repeated unification. So this actually speeds up things considerably, but it does require us to interpret disjunctions slightly differently. So there were already, even for the old eval v3 and eval v2, there were outstanding issues for that, but that becomes now more important. So we do want to implement that before the final release. Would also increase the usability of Q quite a bit in general. More, too much details for now, but we'll post some proposals for that. So towards 1.0 for the evaluator. So last time we mentioned we had a proposal for the validator simplification. So that's ready to be submitted. It's implemented. So basically, we won't simplify validators anymore. So if you have a non-concrete validator that can never, if you unify 2 validators, they cannot become concrete, which is a nice property. So we just have to sort of plan in which release this will be released. So then another thing to implement for the next release for sure is the export specific disjunct elimination, which I mentioned before, which is quite critical now for the new closeness algorithm to really make it compatible. And then we want to continue with more language proposals, so making equals defined on all Q values, which has a lot of benefits. Implement the error built-in and friends. Also come up with a new proposal for defaults, and we have already pending for a long time a proposal for try, which is quite a nice construct. I think it will address a lot of complaints that people have about the usability of Q. So a lot of these things are backwards compatibility, but insofar they're not, we plan to provide a Q fix for that. Yes. So next steps, direct next steps, fix the remaining issues. There are some API differences. So we don't know if people use WASM with Q all that much, but there are some things broken there. It might be that it's already fixed. I haven't checked for a while. There were a lot of incompatibilities in the API. Most of them are fixed now. I think there's one open API incompatibility that is left. So where the open API output is slightly different, but by far most of them are fixed. But if you run into any issues, please let us know. So also heads up, so we already no longer developing eval v2. We do plan to keep it around. So in eval v13 it will be around, but for maybe 14, but definitely after that we plan to remove it. It's just extra weight right now in the code base to keep that around. Especially now eval v3 is much closer in semantics to eval v2. There's probably less reasons to keep it around. Yes.
Awesome. Thanks, Marcel. So the key thing there being try out alpha 3, and when it lands, try out alpha 4. Because you will have eval v3 by default at that point, and please just report as aggressively as you can any regressions that you see in correctness, performance, whatever it might be, or indeed the Go API. Anything you see that's a bit strange, please don't feel shy about raising it. We're happy to dig in. And this is just a quick refresher. This came up at KubeCon on a number of occasions about how Q can be used from other languages for those who are interested in exploring this space. Java and Python being the two that use the C API that's exposed via libq. Please get in touch if you are looking to experiment in this area. We're happy to learn from problems that you're having in the space, but also to have people contribute in the space as well. For example, Rust is one interface. Rust is one other language that others have talked about. Encodings, Daniel.
Yep. So I did give quite a lot of news at the last community call, and something I did mention is that there was a new proposal for an XML encoding for Q, the keyword there being one XML encoding for Q, because for any of you that have worked with XML before, you will realize that XML doesn't map to, for example, JSON cleanly, right? Attributes and namespaces are the biggest example of that. So there was the proposal for a number of weeks. And we have tentatively merged an experimental implementation of this XML encoding that has been named Koala. That may have something to do with the author being in Australia. So the TLDR is that you can use this in master now. It's not released in an alpha yet, but soon. And you can use it by basically saying XML plus Koala, meaning you can think of Koala as a variant of XML or a way to interpret XML in Q, right? But this is not available if you just do, for example, qvet data.xml, because there is no default or like base XML encoding for Q. And this is what it looks like. It's pretty basic in terms of mapping XML to Q, and it basically follows the Badgerfish convention, but adapted a little bit for Q, because Badgerfish uses @symbols, which require quoting in Q, and they also use the single $, which is not a it's sort of a reserved identifier in Q. So it is a very similar idea in terms of attributes and namespaces just become fields with a prefix, as well as the inline bodies become the $. But it's a pretty one-to-one basic interpretation of XML.
Thanks, Daniel. Just briefly to refresh that is a huge work to get that in. So thank you very much to the author who contributed that XML encoding, and Daniel for sort of getting us to the point where it could be merged as well. Just to emphasize something that Daniel said, though, that is one interpretation of XML. There are others, and if folks are playing around with XML and sort of interested in exploring that space more, please do give the Koala encoding a whirl. But if you're finding, so for example, you actually need full round trip ability between Q and XML, please just get in touch. We're absolutely not saying this is the only interpretation of XML there. It's an excellent starting point for kicking the tires on it, and it will serve some use cases absolutely entirely. So please just shout if you want to explore XML more. Dominic, you're going to talk about Q at KubeCon?
Yes, so basically 2 weeks ago, we were all in London, most of us in London, to prepare for KubeCon. It was a lot of last minute work, but in general, I would say we had a blast being there in KubeCon London. Quite a few people that are here on the call. It was the first time we met in person. It was a very interesting and also educational experience because we learned a lot about Q users that we haven't talked to before. We learned a lot about Q use cases that were very interesting. We're still following up with all the individuals we talked to during the conference, and it was, yeah, fantastic. We handed out some cool Q swag. I have a picture here of the t-shirt we were wearing. Thought it was a clever pun with the "let me queue you in," but we were wearing a badge during the conference, so nobody really could read it, but the color was at least very well, it highlighted where we are. So great conversations, very educational, very inspiring as well. We have prepared some photos from the event. So this was probably before the doors opened. We were still like in the last minute preparation phase. During the event, we gave a lot of demos that attracted quite a bit of attention and was really a nice split. So there were a lot of people that have already used Q and knew about it, but wanted to learn more. But there were also lots of people that have never heard of it. And when we explained Q, there was already like, oh, we could use it here, here, and here, which basically played and tied in what we also thought is a good use case for Q. That is us with Rockcode, who's a friend of us. We miss taking a lot of picture because the booth was quite busy at times. Saw some people that we know very well drop by, like Kelsey, like the people here on the call. And next time we are very sure to make more pictures. I would say, Paul, I hand over to you to explain a little bit more what we showed during the conference.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks again to everyone who joined us on the booth. So what we started talking about was the new content that exists on q.dev now. You'll see this domain name being used a bit more. It's just nicer for us to use. In particular, we picked up on the conversation around the central registry, and as Dominic said, for those people who weren't necessarily familiar with Q, the dependency management is a sort of a key part of everything we do with regular programming languages on a day-to-day basis, but it's a key part of any sort of system that isn't just entirely self-written, i.e. what do you depend on and how do you depend on things. So the central registry was an excellent starting point for introducing people to Q and sort of taking them on a bit of a journey with Q. The central registry is not specific to curated schemas, but those schemas that we are curating from upstream to help get things started, help bootstrap things, we're even using them ourselves, actually provide a really good learning opportunity. And so here is a handful of those curated schemas, and I'll talk about the non-curated schemas in a bit as well. So let's just take GitHub Actions workflow. The way it typically went is that someone would drop by and we say, are you familiar with any of these? And CI/CD was perhaps the most common. Somewhat surprisingly, Kubernetes, other people maybe not directly driving Kubernetes, but sort of using Kubernetes beneath the hood, as it were. So CI/CD was a really good starting point. And so taking GitHub Actions workflows as a start. This is how we then explain to people we can get started with Q. And so just saying, well, dependency management in Q is as simple as an import directive here, but let's imagine you've never written any Q in the first place. How would you just check an existing GitHub Actions YAML file using Q? And this is where the new work that Rog had done before KubeCon sort of started to come in on top of eval v3, which was the default. Rather cheekily, we were using Alpha 3 as the basis for our demos here. But as you can see, what we're doing here, just above, you can't see it, it's slightly out of shot, as a YAML file for a GitHub Actions workflow. And then you have this one-shot command that you can use below with qvet, no module needed, no import needed at all, where you can say qvet and specify that you want to use the workflow schema from, and here is the q.dev import path, specifying the latest version of the GitHub Actions workflow, the GitHub Actions module, excuse me. And so then we're validating the workflow.yaml file there and showing people that just with an existing YAML setup, you can just do a one-shot validation using Q, and that being the starting point. And then taking it from there to import to Q and start to manage things at Q and then building things out from there. So that story was incredibly well received, and people, as Dominic said, could readily see, oh my goodness, we can use validation right now, and then we can start to build up a wider configuration namespace, as it were, with Q, and then start to understand, then they could see how they could use constraints between different parts of their configuration using Q to effectively get rid of those configuration silos that exist today. The central registry is then a key part of that, and whilst we're showing the top 5 curated packages here, it's absolutely not limited to modules and packages that we have curated. Indeed, there are a number of open source projects and non-open source projects that are publishing or that will very soon publish to the central registry as a way of sharing their schemas in a way that their users can either just use for ad hoc validation or as part of building up a wider configuration namespace. So we plan to publish a guide on talking about how to sort of publish something to the central registry, and I'll talk a bit more about that later on. So these are just some quick links for now. I'm going to hand over to Rog to talk a bit more about the work we're actually doing with the curated modules in particular and the central registry. There's some quick links to the pages that I just talked through there. And Rog, over to you.
Yes, so I'll talk a little bit more about the central registry. You know, our stated goal is to act as a well-known place for well-known schemas, for well-known services. It's definitely not limited to that. That's just a nice byline. So, you know, it can also be a place for lesser well-known schemas, for lesser well-known services. There's nothing stopping anyone from publishing their own schemas for whatever services, whatever schemas they choose. It's a domain name-based namespace, which means you can't just publish a name foo. You have to publish it to some name that you control. And currently, that's restricted to GitHub-based modules, but we're going to shortly make that possible to publish things, so-called vanity domains, to make it so that you can publish to another domain that you control as well. We use semantic versions based on some of the previous Go work on, semantic versions and the MVS, so based on some of the Go work previously. And you can publish any sort of queue, whether it's you're publishing something where Q is the source of truth, or perhaps you're deriving from some upstream JSON schema or some other source of truth which you're producing the queue from. Now it's currently beta. That's a change from the last community update where it was in alpha. And the web page at the moment is registry.q.works. We are going to move to registry.q.dev. But that will happen in due course. And currently you have to authenticate with GitHub. It doesn't require any permissions beyond the absolute minimum. It uses GitHub for authorization. We are going to move towards having read-only, no auth access. Paul will talk about that a little bit later. And there's lots of continuing work on actually documentation, automatically generated documentation from your published Q modules, and search and discovery, and generally make it a useful hub to discover modules as well as pull modules from this place. So as mentioned before, there are a bunch of curated modules already published. So we're working to add to those. And one of the things we're looking to add modules for containing CRDs, Kubernetes custom resource definitions. And as a proof of concept, we've published some CRDs for Kyverno, just an arbitrary request for some users. Let's choose that. It was a pretty arbitrary choice otherwise. And we've landed some changes in the JSON schema package in Q itself to support CRDs better. That work is ongoing. So we're going to have more support for CRDs in the core repo. For now, most of the work is happening in the curation space. But yeah, that certainly will be brought back into the core Q repo. And I've linked to a couple of places where that's so. We're importing from the YAML from the CRDs inside Kyverno, and there's an example link to the documentation that's generated for that. And all feedback, we want as much feedback as possible. We're aware of some limitations. There are other module-related enhancements that we've got planned. QMod vendor, in particular, to copy your dependencies into your local module, so you can run it without any hitting the network at all. And replace directives, also much requested feature that is on the roadmap. And another thing that we've been work in progress design for dependency islands, which is how in theory you should be able to take some self-contained dependency with its own entire set of MVS dependencies, independent of the ones that you have in the main module. And the idea behind that is that actually sometimes you want different minor versions of a particular dependency. This is something that in Go, where the sort of MVS was designed, you really can't have two versions of the same package because they collide in terms of global variables, etc. Q doesn't actually have global variables, so there's no fundamental issue with having two versions of the same minor version of the module in your dependency graph. So we plan on supporting that in the future, and I think that's going to be super useful when you actually require two different versions in the same dependency graph. So as far as next steps go, so lots more documentation, and we're aiming on curating more CRDs. If you have any requests as to which sort of any ones you'd particularly like to see, then please let us know. I'd like to make the CRD importer available in the Q command, so that you'll be able to directly import your own maybe custom CRDs, your own local local control communities controller CRDs. Currently, there's a issue that the API version and the kind fields are just left open, but actually they need to be a specific value. We're not filling them in yet. We should, and we will. So improved rendering of documentation, some improved. So we have some search and discovery that's going to be ongoing, improved. We want some better authentication integration with GitHub Actions, so that when you run a GitHub action, your action will have the same privileges that the bot can. So you won't have to feed it keys specifically. So that's OADC Connect, I think, is the term for that, and also more options for authentication, so you won't necessarily need to have a GitHub account. There are potential options for more authentication sources, and your vanity domain support I've mentioned already. And in general, if you want to see a module and you see that it has some upstream, particularly if it's a JSON schema upstream, and you want to see it in the curated modules, please let us know. Some contact details there.
I just jump in there, Rog, actually, with all this talk about curated modules. If there are any upstreams, as it were, that want to take ownership of these things and publish Q modules natively themselves, absolutely, please go right ahead. There's no need for the curation space necessarily, as if a project that actually owns a schema wants to be responsible for publishing that and versioning it, etc. That's totally fine. As Roger indicated, these things can coexist if there are two namespaces, but fundamentally, it's almost the best case where a project takes ownership for publishing a schema for something and is themselves publishing to the central registry. So not to say that curation is the only way, but as we get started here, and particularly where there's a rich ecosystem of JSON schema or open API based schemas, this is the space where the curation fits in. So the work that Roger's doing in our CRDs and the Kubernetes ecosystem is hugely valuable. So thanks, Roger.
And speaking of Q as a source of truth, I'll mention this is passing just because I've found it really nice, is that Q with the new Gen Go types experimental commands, I've been finding it fantastic to just take Q as a source of truth and generate some Go types from that and work with that. So rather than having like Go generating Q from Go, generating Go from Q is like really, really cool, because actually Q is more expressive than Go at expressing constraints. So I can totally see that being useful for having when modules in the central registry generating Go code from that. So please look out, give these curated modules a go, give the central registry a go, check out the modules channel on Slack and Discord, and we plan on having some office hours calls to demonstrate and explore the curated modules space. If you're interested, please let us know about that. Yeah. Maybe I'll pass over to Paul.
Yeah, sure, I can hand over here. So I sort of alluded to this earlier on. There are a number of open source projects that are already publishing and more that will publish to the central registry, and similarly, not open source projects or products as well that will do as well. So if you're interested in thinking, hang on a second, should I be publishing something to the central registry, either for my own benefit or my team's benefit or wider users' benefit, please let us know. Sort of a classic use case is where you want to share a schema with others so that they can do validation first, if you like, before sending a configuration to your application or system. But there are plenty of other use cases out there where things become validation first or queue first. If you need a bit of help getting started with publishing to the central registry, I'll try and say that word again, the central registry, just give us a shout. As I said, we are planning to create a guide on creating your first Q first application as a means of demonstrating some of those best practices that Rog just alluded to, where you create a schema first and the application that you're publishing consumes that schema as like a consumer of the schema, like any other consumer. You perhaps generate some Go types for it, and everything hangs off the source of truth that is the schema. Then publishing that schema so your users can validate their configuration first, and sort of helping see and understand how this sort of threads Q throughout the story and connects what are otherwise, what were previously, silos, either as part of your software stack or just configuration stack generally. So that's something we plan to do. We'll be publishing that shortly. And related to that is what's the auth story? And this was something that was particularly well received at KubeCon. The demos that we showed to folks at KubeCon did have a Q login step on the documentation pages and when we were showing folks. We are working on a no auth read-only access to the central registry. That really being a key part of driving the Q ecosystem. As I said, whether it's an open source Q-based tool or not, doesn't actually matter. Everything that we've done with the Q modules is, as we sort of, when we had that sort of, I forget which version of the modules proposal it was, where we shifted things to being OCI based, has been based on open source primitives here. And the OCI registry package that I've linked to there is what Q itself is built on, and any other project as well can build on top of OCI registry as well. So where Command Q has auth primitives, for example, that allow it to do device-based auth with the central registry, there's absolutely no restriction on that being with the central registry. It can be with any OCI registry. And the OCI registry module that Rog has principally worked on there is guided towards being agnostic of which OCI registry you're speaking to and what auth primitives you're using. The story here really being is that if you create a tool that is Q first or Q based, uses the regular Q loading mechanism, you get auth for free, basically. In that you can, by default, you can say to your users, let's grab things from the central registry. And as I outlined at the top here, there's no auth read-only access where you need that. But when your users, perhaps they start using things more aggressively and they want higher rate limits, they want to auth with the central registry, you as the author of that application don't need to do anything. It will just work out of the box using the OCI auth primitives that we're building on top of. Similarly, if your users, and this was something that came up a number of times at KubeCon, similarly, if your users are actually sort of in more of an enterprise setting where they perhaps don't even have any internet access at all, they have their own internal OCI registry, no problem at all. You literally just point at your internal OCI registry and all of the Q ecosystem that you have continues to work. So this was one of the main drivers behind things being OCI based and this whole idea of considering the non-public use cases like a first-class citizen that we talked about. And so, as I said, this on the previous slide, this guide that is creating your first Q-first application will also explore this auth part and make it clear how any Q-based tooling can just seamlessly upgrade, if you like, through whatever auth requirements the end user has. So look forward to showing more on that in the next couple of weeks. And I think that, Rogers, everything on the module side of things. I don't think there was anything else. So handing over to Matthew for LSP.
Cool, thank you. So yes, so to date, Paul has done enormous work getting the LSP support for Q, getting all the framework in place and sort of ready to go, and also sorting out all sorts of things on the VS Code side. But yeah, Paul obviously is not short of things to do. So I've now moved on to QLSP full-time. So hopefully within the next few weeks, we will get some initial versions of LSP out and usable. The plan here is to very much do a sort of incremental series of releases rather than, you know, disappearing for 3 months and then trying to launch a fully featured product there. So the initial features, as listed here, formatting, Paul has already done that. That already works now. And then the sort of normal go-to definition, hover, so getting some sort of diagnostics back or documentation flowing through. And then obviously error diagnostics there too. We will obviously test against VS Code, being the most popular editor, I think, at the moment. Test against the OneTrue editor, and then we also have some Vim users as well. So we'll make sure that all works out of the box. Next steps. I mean, this hasn't really changed very much from our last announcement here. Interacting with the normal sort of what's the word? Repository is not quite the right word, but the ways of distributing plugins for VS Code. And then just, all of the normal community stuff, making sure that bugs can be reported, making sure that updates get sent out correctly, and so forth. Yeah, I don't think there's much more to say there. Obviously, we are fully aware that some of our competitors in this space have extremely good LSP support, and so the intention is absolutely to catch up there.
Thanks, Matthew. To those who have been keenly watching in this space, thank you again for your patience. Just to reiterate, the pre-KubeCon push for eval v3 was a significant time sink. And so without getting eval v3 over the line there, we're effectively building on sand. But great that Matthew has now taken this up full time. He brings a huge amount of experience within this space, and so, but his full time on it is actually going to be the thing that moves the dial here on it. So look forward to actually, as Matthew said, catching up. Thank you to everybody for their patience. Dominic, did you want to say something?
Yes, sure. So on community and ecosystems, obviously at KubeCon we had lots of fantastic interactions and conversations. We learned a lot. We've seen recently, especially fantastic articles on Q. Thank you, Tom, and also Andrew. If you write something about Q, if you've already written something about Q, please share it either with us or like on Slack or Discord. If you want to write something, let us know if you can help. You would be highly appreciated. We also work and start working more and more on case studies, like specific tasks, challenges that Q can be implemented. If you have any idea there and want to collaborate with us, just let us know, ping us here or ping anyone, basically. We will get back to you. Regarding logos, as usual, please, if you use Q and want the logo displayed on the website, let me know. We will probably increase the number there now quite a bit, especially also after KubeCon, because we had like a few discussions where this came up, not on the deck here, but also something we did and discussed at KubeCon was that a lot of users basically love using Q, and they want their team or their colleagues to work with Q, but there's always like, adapting a new technology. So if you're in this position, reach out to us. We're happy to do like a brown bag session. So we give like a short intro about Q, and then we do like an open Q&A. So if you're interested also, please reach out. Anything around contributing or like sharing around Q and content, just let us know. We're happy to help here.
Yeah, the number of situations where we found Q being used whilst at KubeCon suggests this list of logos is woefully incomplete. And so we will very gently chase down those places that are publicly using Q, because it was honestly fascinating at times to hear of people who maintain those projects coming up and saying, oh, we're using Q, and us being blissfully unaware of the fact Q was being used in XYZ project. Thanks. Just seeing Tom's name there reminds me, before KubeCon, we had a session which was called Deployment Patterns. Rog, Tom, and a number of others actually joined that session. What we were starting to explore was how, once you've started taking things under control in Q, how you actually move to talk about different environments, different regions, and having many hands maintain configuration in those different layers or planes or hierarchies, whatever it might be. And we're absolutely looking to pick up that conversation post KubeCon. So I'll be sending out a suggested couple of meeting times for us to sort of have a bit of a forcing function on another conversation on that topic. So if you're interested in that, please let me know. Tom and others, it was a great conversation last time around. So look forward to picking that up, because again, we had similar sorts of conversations whilst at KubeCon as well. Otherwise, I think we are done with everything we're running through. So if anybody has any questions they'd like us to tackle now, please go ahead. Marcel, I don't know whether you want to stop presenting. That'd be great. Thank you. Rog said we'll also be doing some office hour type things on modules, whether they be curated modules or otherwise. So happy to walk through any examples that people might have then. You've stunned everybody into silence today. This is either good or bad. I'm assuming people have plenty to be getting on with. So if we can actually just bring things to a nice early close today. But if anybody does want to ping us in the meantime, let us know. We'll send out the recording and the slides as we always do. I'll let Hans, by all means, we can, if you want to follow up in Slack or Discord on that, Matthew can absolutely pick up, because I have to say I'm one of the NeoVim users, so I can't contribute in that. But it's good that we've got a lot of different editor users around the table, let's be fair. We do. I don't think Acme has ever heard of LSP. I'm now just
I plan to
baiting
implement
Rog.
support. I plan to do it at some point in my copious spare time.
QMCP, Tony, that is an excellent question. That actually was something that came up in a couple of conversations at KubeCon. So yeah, that is something that in the next couple of weeks, I think we're going to be, so if folks have any interests in that space, just let us know. Please just drop us, whether in Slack, Discord, or privately. Happy to kick off those conversations. As Dominic said, we're busy at the moment, rapidly trying to get through the number of conversations that we had with folks on the booth. But that was one of the things that came up, Tony. So thanks for raising.
I'd be interested to ask Tony what exactly, because there's various things that could mean. Like, for example, I was looking at MCP. I was looking at importing MCP as a curated schema, for example. So that's one possibility, that we're using Q to generate things in the MCP ecosystem. Another possibility is actually providing Q MCP support for executing things via Q from LLMs. And I'm not sure exactly which one you're referring to. And both of those are interesting, probably both actually. But I'm interested which one you are thinking, Tony.
Tony might have sent a message on the basis that he's otherwise engaged at the moment. But if you want to jump in, Tony, please do. Otherwise, happy to follow up afterwards.
Yeah, the other one I was looking at was the OpenAI API, which is an interesting one to have in the, because it's a rather complex schema, if you like, for the API, and it's really nice to have it exposed in Q. Actually, you can actually see what's going on as opposed to the JSON schema or the OpenAPI definition, which is really quite hard to see.
Yeah, that's something that we didn't talk about earlier on, but the central registry being a source of truth, the schema, policy, and workflows, focusing just on the schema side of things right now. Rog hinted at it, but we'll also make clear how to have effectively non-Q as a source of truth there as well. So if you want to expose something as JSON schema, hitting up an endpoint on the central registry that exports something as JSON schema or OpenAPI. Roger's going to be working on better first-class support within Q for exporting to JSON schema and OpenAPI. So we've done the work effectively on the other side, where we've got more full coverage of importing from JSON schema and OpenAPI. It's now effectively time to do the opposite, to make sure we've got as fuller symmetric capability on that sort of things as possible. Cool. Okay. In which case, thanks everybody for joining. Great to see some new faces and some familiar faces. We'll share the recording and the transcript and slides, and look forward to catching up next time, or otherwise in Slack, Discord, or other mediums between now and then.